Welcome to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast, episode number 24.
Look at this GoPro popping off, 24. I think I say that almost every
You do,
intro.
yeah. From about 10 onwards, you're like, fuck, man, we're the best. We got 10 episodes. Episode 24. So as you can probably tell from the title, we're talking about a little bit of a controversial topic in this one, drugs.
Drugs. Get your good drugs.
And not even the good ones. We're not talking about, the fun drugs. We're talking about PEDs or performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah,
Bit of lingo for you.
Yeah, the ones that are illegal in most professional sports, right? Well, I guess I think all professional sports they're technically illegal, right?
Yeah, and we're gonna take not a deep dive, but we're going to, I suppose, scratch the surface and uncover some, truth behind what the go is in jiu-jitsu. This is the big scoop. But no, we're basically talking about why drugs are so prevalent in jiu-jitsu compared to other sports, or maybe they're not, and talk about different organizations that are set up to prevent that. And then we're going to name drop some, Gordon Ryan, some big names in the industry in, jiu-jitsu that get the blame and get the finger pointed at them so regularly when it comes to PEDs.
Yeah, there's a lot of professional jiu-jitsu athletes who have been caught taking drugs or constantly have the finger pointed at them but never been caught taking them. There's people who you may not suspect to be taking PEDs, take them. And, you got to remember there's different types of PEDs, which I don't know a lot about, but I know that it is not what the average person who's not super educated about it, they think about drugs or steroids and they just think about
Phil Heath, Arnold Schwarzenegger,
you just think about big
Kai
muscular
Green.
dudes.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about.
No,
right?
Not at all.
So before we go into the jiu-jitsu side of drugs and what we think about them and who's taking them and where you get them,
how to buy them, what the doses are, how to inject.
The first thing that I'll point out that was, previously I was like most people, I thought steroid use was just that getting big and jacked. And I didn't really even understand how they worked, right?
Yeah.
It's not like I thought you just took an injection and woke up the next day muscular, of course, but I didn't really knew how they worked. And for those who also don't know, I was semi-surprised to learn that when you take steroids, it's not like this, some people go, oh yeah, I could do that if I took steroids or whatever. And I'm like, man, that's not how it works, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not saying, you know more about this. I'm not saying you know more about this than me because you used to take steroids, which you did. But
I currently take steroids. Let's get it right.
No, it doesn't. But obviously you being a personal trainer and a nutritionist and you just know, and being an ex-bodybuilder, right, you know more about this than I do, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the main use for steroids or the type of steroid, growth hormone, I guess, right?
GH,
the type of steroid that people are more familiar with. It's not that it makes you build more muscle. It's essentially that it accelerates your recovery time, right? Like one of the things I was told is, let's say you can work out your chest, right, twice a week normally. Well, if you're taking the right types of drugs, you could work out your chest like twice a day, 4 days a week, so it allows you to train more.
Yeah.
And then when you have bodybuilders and such saying, no, you couldn't do what I do, even if you had the drugs.
Yeah. It's
because it's not like it's a magical injection. You still need to put in like the work, a huge amount of work. So, it's just, if you're not already putting in that work, once a day, how can you think that taking this drug that allows you to do it 2 or 3 times a day, like, you need to put in, like steroid use allows you to work at a capacity of whatever, like 300% instead of at 100%. So if you're not already able to, you don't have the mental toughness to work at 100%, steroids aren't going to do jack for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to steroids, there's a couple different things that you need to consider. Now, there are examples of people out there that take PEDs, so just call them PEDs or steroids or interchange. For those that didn't catch it at the start, PED is performance enhancing drugs. And when you say PEDs, you're talking about more than just steroids. You're talking about growth hormones. You're talking about peptides, SARMs, which we'll unpack a little bit.
Because the word steroid, again, if you're not super educated about it, people just think it's this negative word. And there's like, I mean, I've taken steroids.
Yeah, medication.
But I took steroids
well,
where I had injections after surgeries.
Yeah.
My mum has chronic rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
Takes certain types of medical steroids,
yeah,
right?
asthma medication is like steroids. So, yeah.
So different, right?
Yeah, completely different. Steroids is a very, very broad term. And anyway, I'm not going to go too deep down the rabbit hole. We'll just try and keep it practical and fairly surface level, but,
we'll go over that when we have Dr. Carl on.
Yeah, when Dr. Carl comes on, yeah, absolutely. Or Gordon Ryan, probably better, more practical experience there compared to old mate Carl. So basically, as I was saying, there are so many examples out there of people taking PEDs and looking like shit. Just because you take PEDs doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. It does improve your capacity for recovery. But basically, when it comes to people taking performance-enhancing drugs, the most predominant is some form of testosterone. So testosterone being the primary male hormone, even though females do have testosterone as well, but the levels are just so much lower. Like as a man, if you had the same levels as a woman, you would basically, that's suggestion of either steroid abuse or you have a severe medical condition or you've gone through a traumatic experience, like something's gone terribly wrong, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about PEDs, when we talk about, what people mostly take, it's testosterone, exogenous testosterone, which means that you're injecting something to your body that is effectively either ramping up your body's production of testosterone, or you're just implementing a huge dose of testosterone that's floating around in your body. So yeah, it does increase your capacity for recovery. However, one really important thing that you need to consider is your genetics. Genetics play a huge role in one, how your body is going to respond to the PEDs, and two, how you're actually going to look in response to that. And they're slightly different. Now, the first one is genetic predisposition to heart conditions, kidney conditions, like not to go too deep into it, but if you have like an Ep.024 genetic SNP, like a genetic mutation, then you're predisposed to have a heart condition based on taking PEDs. But you can look in, if you're interested in taking PEDs, then look into that further. But basically what I'm trying to say is you can take PEDs and still look like shit. That doesn't mean that you're not getting the benefits from it.
Would that be the result of genetics or the result of people not taking advantage of the drug they're taking?
Yeah, it's 100% both. So you can have really shit genetics, unfortunately. Like in terms of maybe you've probably seen it before without even realizing it. Someone, that has, and this is a little bit more towards bodybuilding side of things, not so much performance enhancing in sport because they're a little bit different. But it comes to the point, it is relevant in jiu-jitsu because like you said, there's probably people out there that are taking and you wouldn't know because you don't look at them and associate them with the bodybuilder physique. You're like, oh, they don't even look good. So of course they're not on pads.
Yeah, well, probably like the most famous PED professional athlete who got caught taking them, who doesn't at all look like someone who takes drugs, would be Lance Armstrong, right?
Yeah.
Like that's something where, again, I don't know.
And it depends on your training and what you were taking.
And what you're trying to use the drug for, right? Like obviously he wasn't taking a drug to turn into a bodybuilder.
Yeah, he was doing all sorts of stuff. He was taking drugs and he was also doing a lot of blood doping. So that was
the one where you get more like oxygenated blood.
Yeah,
right?
effectively. Yeah. So that's a different sort of conversation. However, it's still very relevant. Now, one thing I want to press is there are signs of PED use. They're not always like the basic signs, like, oh, he's got acne, so he takes PEDs. But one sign that is it is a sign of PED use, but is not the only one, is of course muscle development. Okay, bigger tissue, like specific development in specific areas. For example,
is muscle development different to muscle growth?
No, it's same thing,
Right,
same thing. But depending on your drug, you may have certain development in certain areas, right? So traps is a big one. If you look at Tom Hardy, people always say that, you know, he was clearly on drugs when
The actor, Tom
Tom
Hardy?
Hardy.
Right.
He was clearly on PEDs when he you know, bulked up for his movie role in Bane. Just look at his traps, right? Because big traps is a sign of exogenous testosterone use. It's just where in men, like if you take a lot of testosterone, you're prone to develop very large traps.
Really? I didn't know that.
Same with your shoulders as well. Like big boulder type shoulders or delts are a very predominant sign of someone that takes trenbolone, a specific type of PED.
Right.
A specific.
I didn't know that. I really didn't know there were
Yep.
specific areas.
It can be, yeah. And
yeah,
that's
right.
telltale signs of PED use. And when some people that have taken or understand a little bit about PEDs, when they look at Gordon Ryan, they look at his delts and say, look at his delts, they're very trend-like. Now, that doesn't really mean shit because you need to have a look at someone's genetics, right? So if you look at Gordon Ryan's genetics, like look at photos of him when he was a teenager, when he's clearly not using anything. He has fantastic genetics. Like he could be a fitness model, like realistically. The particularly his abs, like fantastic in terms of like, he could be a fucking bodybuilder. They're great. And he's dealt, he's very well developed.
Some people have it, right? Like
Exactly.
one of my best friends, you know, we used to live together and everything, and he used to play a lot of you know, rugby and stuff. He, even to today, is someone who, you know, kind of doesn't really work out. Oh, well, back then he played more rugby and he was more fitter and active, younger, right? Now he's got kids and everything, and that's all fine. But what I'm trying to say is he kind of, even without exercise, had that perfect sort of, you know, like V shape, like broad shoulders, V shaped torso and everything, like
V
sort of
taper.
like, Superman sort of outline without even doing any exercise.
Yeah, just blessed genetics. So to be the world's best bodybuilders, like not even just the world's best, but to be in, you know, to compete at a high level, you could even say at bodybuilding, and I'm not talking natural bodybuilding, you need fantastic genetics, but you also need to do everything else that comes along with it. So nutrition, you need to work out really hard. You need to have a very good training program. But there are some people out there, they just look at some weights and they'll put on muscle. Like, so there are exceptions, there are outliers. But just because someone doesn't look super shredded, diced, or massive does not mean that they're not taking performance-enhancing drugs. Because not all PEDs are just testosterone. You can take other things that improve your recovery that are still illegal. So that's my little rant on PEDs. But when you bring it into the jiu-jitsu context, it is important to note that IBJJF from 2017 onward started utilizing USADA to do drug testing. So for those that don't know, USADA is the US anti-doping agency, and they base a lot of their what's banned and what's allowed on WADA. They're basically their banned substance list. So WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency. So these agencies, again, for those that don't know out there, they are what the Olympics uses for their anti-doping. So they're pretty much the gold standard in terms of anti-doping organizations. However, for anyone that's seen Icarus knows that they can be
if you haven't seen Icarus, watch it.
It's a great documentary. Icarus is a documentary on Netflix. We've spoken about it a couple of times on the show, but just a very quick summary. It's about a guy who intended to do a cycling race drug-free and then do it again a couple of years later or the following year on drugs to see his performance difference. And he hired a Russian guy to help him beat the drug tests. And then it ended up just unraveling.
The Russian dude ended up being like a whistleblower for all the Russian drug scheme and the Olympics and what they did in Sochi, right? And
it's basically
such a good documentary.
The right place at the right time with the right people. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity documentary. So definitely go and watch that. Again, it's on Netflix.
Is it still on Netflix?
Yeah, it's still on Netflix.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. So back to the point. There's IBJJF does do drug testing.
Very limited.
It is very limited, and it can be beaten. I'm pretty sure, like only if you get on the podium do you get drug tested.
I believe they only I believe they only drug test if you make it on the podium in the black belt division.
There you go.
So like, and that ahead of time. So
you can beat the test.
Yeah, you can beat the test. You
like,
can cycle on and, well, steroids are taken,
Yeah.
PEDs are taken in cycles, right?
Yeah.
So you can cycle on and off, and
there's certain things that cannot be detected unless they run specific tests for that drug. Now, again, I don't want to, I'm trying to keep
and
this
all this,
episode structured, but.
Well, you got to remember as well, like, sometimes people ask, oh, why don't they just test everyone, or why don't they do this, do that?
It's very expensive.
Yeah, this shit costs money.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's not free.
Yeah.
And, who's paying for it, right? Well, obviously the IBJJF are paying for it. Like, it all costs a lot of money. I don't know how much money.
But if they have the testing in place, at least they force the athletes to either, cycle off or not do it. Ideally not do it, or you deter most people. Because if you can compare IBJJF to ADCC, ADCC does not implement any drug testing. And, it's pretty well known they don't. Or even look at the MMA world, for example. Look at UFC. They implement drug testing through USADA. And then compare that to one championship. They don't. And they openly don't. The difference in the physiques of the athletes is very stark. You have a look at some athletes in one championship, they're clearly on gear.
One of the more recent well-known ones was I forget the name of the drug he was taking, but Vitor Belfort.
Yeah.
What was the one he was taking?
Oh, I'm not sure about
But
Vitor.
if you look at him, like, I know he was also aging, but if you look at his body when he was on whatever it was on, and then he got caught and had a ban or something, and then when he came back and fought not on the drug, dude, like, you can't even compare them, right?
Well, funnily enough, I ran into this video unrelated to this episode, but I ran into this video a few days ago. And Anderson Silva, when UFC did like a Cribs sort of special back in 2017 with Anderson Silva,
he had some illegal stuff.
He had growth hormone. He had growth hormone boxes basically in his wardrobe, in his walk-in wardrobe, and the camera just quickly panned past them, and some keen-eyed individual like freeze frame knew what it was and called him out. And that was just before UFC implemented USADA testing, anti-doping testing.
He also, I believe, he got caught after his second fight with Chris Weidman.
He
did. But I mean, you also got to remember he was coming back from a massively grotesque injury.
Insane injury.
The one where he snapped his shin in half from a leg kick that was checked.
Yeah.
I don't know much about it, whether it was a drug he was taking to aid that recovery, which wouldn't surprise me.
I think he was taking it before. But
yeah, maybe taking it before, whatever it was.
In the world of jiu-jitsu, it's, you don't have to be a genius to realize that most, and I say most, of the top jiu-jitsu athletes, I'm talking like ADCC, the super fight type athletes, are on some form of PED.
I would say like more than 90% of them are.
Yeah. And the more people that do it, the more important it becomes to take them, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to, say, for example, you're out there and you're trying to beat Gordon Ryan, and that hypothetically, he's taking drugs. You need to take drugs to match that.
I mean, because it gets to a point, if everything is equal against your opponent, like if you had a complete carbon copy clone of yourself that you're fighting, and the only thing different between you and your clone is that your clone is on drugs, well, who's going to win, right? Like, so, and the very commonly well-known example is with the Tour de France, right? Where it's something like you have to go back to 20th place or something to find someone who's not on drugs or something like that, right? And I mean, this is a sport that you're not allowed to dope in, and yet people still beat it. I mean, there's so many documentaries on Lance Armstrong and people interviewing and explaining the lengths that they went through to get around the doping. Obviously, no jiu-jitsu athlete has access to the sort of schemes that they were doing. But man, when I say that I reckon 90% or more are taking it, that's just not me looking at a bunch of jack dudes on the podium going, oh, they're on juice. I mean, I lived through this, my time in Brazil, like I'm not going to say any names of training partners, but I mean, they were like all taking it. It's not like you ever saw anyone taking it, but everyone knew. And there was even one particular doctor in Brazil that like all the athletes used because he would just give you whatever. You could just easily get it from him. So, I saw it firsthand. All these dudes like were on it, right? And you could tell because they just, well, I mean, people talked about it in the gym, but even if you ignore that, the amount they trained, the intensity that they trained, how quickly their bodies changed, right? You could, it's just, it's definitely made me think about doing it. Like I've never taken any type of PEDs. Like I said before, I've taken medical steroids after surgeries and things like that, but I've never taken PEDs. But I would be lying if I said I didn't think about it. Like I was involved in a competition team where everyone else was doing it. I knew the doctor that I could have gone and seen if I wanted. Like I can't remember his name now, but like I knew his name and everything. I could have called and made an appointment and said that I trained with so-and-so and, and I thought about it, right? Because when all your training partners who are doing it and they're all making the podium and everything, it's not like I was ever peer pressured into it, but it's almost like this ambient peer pressure.
Yeah, it's the peer pressure from your environment. It's accessible. Like you've seen the benefits of it. It makes sense. So, yeah. And I mean, not all PEDs are injecting testosterone and, when you take a deep dive into PEDs, the well runs deep. There's a lot of shit you can take. Now, I'm not saying anyone should, and I've never taken any PEDs, but there are a lot. For example, I've mentioned these before, but you can take SARMs. SARMs are not detectable on standard steroid tests, right? So if someone runs a standard PED analysis on your urine after you place at IBJJF Worlds, you could be on SARMs, and unless they test specifically for SARMs, unless, for whatever reason, 2021 is the year that we're recording this, unless they've updated their screening or they have a test for it, but there isn't one unless you specifically test for SARMs. So the shit you can take is basically what I'm saying. There's shit that you can take that's going to be a PED that unless they know what you're taking and test for that specifically, you can get away with it.
They won't find it.
Yeah, same with peptides. Like there's a whole bunch of peptides that you can take that are specifically designed to enhance your recovery for joints. A lot of people use them for recovering from joint injuries, but you can just use them, right, to just enhance your recovery. There's all sorts of peptides you can take that also improve muscle mass. SARMs are the same. SARMs are selective androgen response modulators. So basically, in a nutshell, like if you want to look into how they work, if you're just curious, like Google it. There's heaps of information out there, particularly now on SARMs, and they're very easily accessible. Again, not saying anyone should, but
for you, but link in our link tree.
Yeah, there's an affiliate link for 10% off. No, there's absolutely not. But if you want to know how they work in a nutshell, basically what they do is they stimulate your body's natural production of testosterone. That's pretty much
opposed to injecting
exogenous testosterone, right? Yep. So there's different, like I mentioned in my little rant at the start, there's different styles, we'll call it, different categories of performance-enhancing drugs, different categories or different mechanisms is probably a more scientifically accurate way of describing it. Some steroids that you inject just inject testosterone straight into you. Others stimulate your body's own natural production of testosterone. Okay, there's an important distinction between the two. So SARMs, depending on what type of SARMs you're getting, there are some that do shut down your body's natural production, but SARMs, there's some that won't shut down your body's natural production of testosterone. Whereas if you inject trenbolone, for example, which is one of the most hectic steroids you can inject, it is like the top tier shit. Like it is heavy shit. you would never start with trenbolone. Like that is stuff that, you know, long-term PED users need to build their way up to or should.
So should I start now if I want to get there?
Yeah. You need to 5 cc's of trenbolone a day, which is a fucking lot. So trenbolone will shut down your body's natural production from the first injection, right? Like as soon as you start taking it, your body will stop producing testosterone. The reason your body stops producing testosterone, in very simplistic terms, to make this accessible to everyone, is because your body, it interrupts the feedback loop in your body, right? Your body is assessing how much testosterone is in your blood, is in your body, and once it reaches a certain threshold, it will stop. Right. And then it dips below that threshold, it produces more. It releases like a chemical signal to start the production back up. And there's a huge, very complicated process of how that feedback loop works. But in a nutshell, you inject testosterone, it stops your natural feedback loop and your body shuts down its natural production. When you do that, it has very severe long-term impacts. And if you continue with PED use, and depending on how you do it, what your PCT is, your post-cycle therapy is, or post-cycle treatment, I think the two are interchanged, then it can be long-term impacts on your health. Even if you take something like SARMs, which may seem safer.
Which sound like to a layman sounds like the safer,
but they're not
option.
No, if you abuse SARMs, they're kind of like a bridge. They're like the quote unquote
gateway
safer.
Drug.
They are. They're the safer version of just testosterone, injecting testosterone. But funnily enough, if you really do your research, it may actually be safer just to start with testosterone, like a low dose compared to SARMs, because SARMs are experimental. We don't know the long-term impacts of them, and they do shut down your body's natural production of testosterone anyway. And once you get off them, it can really fuck you up. It can take years to recover.
Right. So like we said before, there's some jiu-jitsu athletes who, you know, you looking at them, you wouldn't think that they're doping. One that was in recent-ish history was, I can't remember if it was Paulo or if it was Joel, but one of the Meow brothers got caught doping, you know, and they're
what he was taking?
No, I don't know. But they're tiny little dudes, right?
Yeah.
Like they fight, you know, lightweight or featherweight or whatever. So small guys, like not big jack dudes, right? But then you look at some of the more obvious ones, which
Andre Galvao. He's
Andre
so
Galvao
obvious.
would be the poster boy for PEDs, right?
Jiu-jitsu.
Like some of his photos from, you know, previous ADCCs and stuff.
He's jacked.
It is absurd how jacked he is, you know, and it's crazy to think like anyone listening, if like go try put on muscle. Yeah. It's incredibly hard, right?
Now, I must say he has very, very good genetics. He's kind of like Gordon Wright in that sense. He has amazing genetics.
But let's just put this in real simple black and white terms. You're someone who trained as a competitive bodybuilder. Let's say I came to you and I'm someone who already does a bit of weightlifting and I said, oh, Kieren, I want to get into bodybuilding, right? And I want to put on whatever amount of kilograms of muscle, whatever it is, right? How many times, like what's in a nutshell my weightlifting schedule looking like? Am I lifting weights twice a week? Am I lifting twice a day? Like what would it be?
It depends on.
Don't give me a depends. Just give me a super basic.
It's so dependable. Like it depends on how like you respond.
Okay, but I guess the point I'm making.
You got to lift a lot.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is it's not twice a week. Right? If you were someone who wanted to be a competitive bodybuilder.
No, you're lifting 6 times a week.
6 times a week, right?
Including cardio, you know, you could be doing 10 sessions a week.
And then, so how is someone like Andre Galvao like putting on muscle at the rate that a bodybuilder puts on muscle, but yet also training as also putting in the mat time that a professional jiu-jitsu athlete there's not enough hours in the day, bro.
Yeah, for recovery
Like it's just not even possible. And if you know a little bit about, like, I'm told from all my personal trainers, strength trainers that I've worked with throughout my jiu-jitsu career, they tell me how the reason it is so difficult to put on mass as a jiu-jitsu athlete is because when you train jiu-jitsu and a lot of it, the sheer amount of calories you burn and the amount of, exercise and cardio you do makes it hard to put on muscle mass, right?
Yeah, they're counterintuitive to each other a lot of the time.
So how can you be like, when you then look like, I don't want to say everyone who's jacked in jiu-jitsu is on it, but then it's just a very clear sign when you look at someone who's just exploded and put on a huge amount of muscle mass, yet also one of the most technical jiu-jitsu fighters in the world. It's like, man, there's kind of, how are you training enough jiu-jitsu to get so good at jiu-jitsu, but yet also putting on muscle when the amount of jiu-jitsu you're doing should be making it more difficult to put on muscle. Like, so Andre Galval just is the classic photo. Kainan also got busted, so that's someone you can I don't know if Galval's, I don't think he's ever been busted, but Kainan got busted. You look at Hulk as well. I think the Atos team as a whole is very kind of, I love Atos. And I think when we did the episode about who I would want to
have dinner with,
like it was Andre Galval. Like I don't want to take anything away from them, but they're definitely the poster boy team for big jacked dudes.
Yeah. Well, there was an interview that Gordon Ryan did. I can't remember what year, and I'm pretty sure it was on Flow Grappling. It was. And he was talking, it was one of those highlight pieces. It was probably one of his road to ADCCs or something like that. And Gordon Ryan was talking about drugs. And he said, we are one of, like, I hope I don't misquote this, but the jux of what he said was basically, we are one of the only teams out there that don't take performance-enhancing drugs for the most part. He said, at the end, he said, for the most part. It was the biggest Freudian slip ever. So you're like,
dude, yeah. I mean, dude, they're all on it, man.
Yeah,
like
100%.
So many of them. And again, like you look at whichever Meow brother it was who got caught, he's not a big jack dude, but he's taken whatever he's taken to allow him to train.
The recovery, the training load is intense, like anything to get an edge, because look at how bad jiu-jitsu is for your joints. Last episode when we spoke about injuries, we mentioned the meows and how they're all like, they walk around all hunched over and shit and they're all gnarled up. But even like that aside, that long-term effect aside, just in the short term, the impact that jiu-jitsu has on your joints in terms of training, if like when I first started training jiu-jitsu in the first few months, I was trying to maintain my weightlifting protocol at the same time, which was about 5 days per week. Impossible. Yeah. My joints were just fucking wrecked. I couldn't even bench press like more than what was my like warm up weight of like 60 kilos on the bench press. I couldn't even fucking bench that.
And this is someone like for people who don't know you face to face, this is someone coming from, someone who has the discipline of going through the military, someone who was an competitive bodybuilder. Like, it's not like you came into jiu-jitsu unfit or whatever. Like, you were already fit. Like, lifting 5 days a week for you was just the norm.
Standard,
it was like brushing your teeth. Like, it's just, I'm not saying it wasn't hard workouts, but I'm just saying it was just part of your routine and your life.
Years and years.
Yeah, for years of doing it. And all of a sudden when you add jiu-jitsu into it, like your weightlifting, right? So
at the moment I can sustain four sessions.
Was that when you then first took some PEDs? You were like,
that's when I did my research and I got on trenbolone. People that are listening to this, they're gonna be like, this dude knows way too much to not have taken something. He's fucking suspect. Look at him. But when I first started lifting, because I'm very, very fortunate, I'm very genetically gifted when it comes to putting on muscle. I put on muscle very easily. Not everyone can, and no, I'm the better. I'm the better genetics. Fuck you. Haha, sucked in. But when I first started lifting, and I reached a point where I went through my beginner game. Like I started lifting for about 6 months or whatever. Didn't make real progress, but then I got real serious about it. I like started focusing on my, nutrition sort of. I hired a PT. I just went fucking hard. I was training like 6 days a week, like 2-hour sessions. I lived in the gym and I put on so much mass really quickly. And some of the old salts at the gym were like, nah, he's on drugs. They would ask my PT and be like, what is he taking? And he'd be like, oh, he's not taking anything. He's like, no, he's 100% juicing. He's on something. Like, there's no way you can put on this much muscle. And dude, I was like fucking 18. I wasn't touching shit.
That's it as well, right? Like you can't you can't take for granted that sort of window from 18 to your
I was like 18, 19.
early to mid 20s.
Yeah,
like
100%.
Males' bodies develop a lot during that period of time,
Absolutely. Like, absolutely. And I was just fucking going hard, and I had very, very good genetics for it. But even then, and I was no way near the size as I am now, because obviously I've had like 6 years of plus 6 or 8 years of like training foundation behind me, building up that, more dense muscle. But even then, people were accusing me of PEDs, and I didn't look like a bodybuilder at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just goes to show that. And even on the flip side of that, just because someone is big doesn't mean that technically just depends on how big they are, though. But yeah, I mean,
some people are just, it's impossible to refute it. Like, obviously it's, the current bodybuilding scene, like the Mr. Universes and stuff.
They're all on it. They're not even denying it.
Yeah, and they don't even deny it. Like, it's absolutely disgusting. And like Galval pretty much looked like those dudes.
Yeah, he could have stepped on stage and done well. Like, 100%. 100%. He's just too big. Like, but it, I'm not saying, I have no idea if he is or not, and he hasn't been caught for anything that I'm aware of, but take like Felipe Penne, for example. When Galval was fighting Felipe at ADCC in their match where Felipe like hit the table. Was it 2019? 2018? Can't remember.
Bro.
Anyway, look up the fights. It's, it was okay. It was a good fight. But Felipe was probably taking shit too. I'm not saying he was. I have no fucking clue. But you don't have to look like Galval to be taking something. Is the point I'm making? Yeah. But
what do you reckon about? Where do you sit as someone newer to the sport and someone who's more knowledgeable about this subject? Where do you sit in terms of whether you should be allowed to take them or not?
Look, I
guess that's even just as a general question, like not even necessarily specific to jiu-jitsu, just in sport.
I do have an opinion on this, and I thought about it. My opinion has changed a lot over the years, but this is pretty much my position on it now. I think if you're competing in an organization that has banned substances, like they've put out formal direction or formal policy to say these substances are banned. If you break those rules, you're a piece of shit. Like if you're competing at IBJJF Worlds and you're taking something that is clearly banned, then I don't think that's cool. Yeah, because you're in a situation where, say you are, you maybe not even in the finals, maybe you're in the road to the finals. If you're taking steroids and you're rolling up against someone who's not, and you really seriously injure them, then that's a moral question, right?
Yeah, but before you move on. Yeah, I 100% agree. Regardless of your position on whether they should be allowed or they shouldn't be allowed, if you're competing in whatever sport and they're not allowed as per the rules, and then you are, there's no ifs, buts, you're clearly cheating.
Yes.
And therefore you freaking suck.
Yeah, you're cheating, yeah.
Like, even if you can't then say, but they should be allowed. No, well, I'm going to go into a jiu-jitsu fight and say, well, I should be allowed to punch him in the face. It's
a redundant statement, right?
It's against the rules.
Yeah.
So, again, regardless of whether you think you should be allowed to take whatever substance, if the rules say you can't, then you can't. And if you disagree, then tough shit, you're not allowed. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, compete in a different organization.
Yeah, that doesn't care.
Like ADCC. So when it comes to people taking PEDs for ADCC, there's no, like, from what I understand, there may be rules against it. I don't know. But there's like, they don't test for it. They haven't employed USADA. I'm pretty sure there's no rules stating you can't. So if people are taking shit and they've weighed up the risk, and they've decided, risk is worth the reward in that case, then I don't have anything against it. It's their body, it's their decision. And everyone knows if you're going in to compete in ADCC, you understand that people are taking PEDs, then it's fine. So long as it's a level playing field and everyone is aware of it, which, at the elite level, they all are. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Don't be naive. Then you're going in knowing that, and if you're someone that doesn't take PEDs, and you go to compete at ADCC, like Lachlan Giles, for example, he's been very public and very loud, particularly earlier this year or late last year. He had a bit of a, I think it was this year, earlier this year.
He said something about it.
Yeah, he said something about it, and then Gordon Ryan got onto him, and it was a funny social media fucking tantrum back and forth between Lachlan Giles, the Australian competitor, and Gordon Ryan. Whoever knows who Gordon Ryan is, they, just for context, Lachlan basically called out most people in the sport with their PED use, and Gordon Ryan bore the brunt of it, and obviously Gordon didn't like that because he loves talking shit on social media. So they just had this back and forth where, what they do? They like said, oh, let's have a fight and we'll bet like 20,000 on it or some shit like that.
It's always bet.
It's crap. Fucking Gordon. He's just being Gordon. But basically the point I'm trying to make is, like, unless you're someone like, Lachlan Giles, who I don't know if he is or isn't, but, goes into it knowingly, they all fucking know.
Yeah.
If you go to compete at ADCC, you know that everyone's on gear.
Yeah, look at the dudes in ADCC. Like, it's massive. But yeah, I don't know. So is that sort of your stance just in sporting in general, that if it's against the rules, you suck if you take it?
Yeah.
If it's not against the rules, then it's up to you.
Yeah, like, again, if you look at another sport like bodybuilding, you look at, the elite of the elite in bodybuilding, they're all taking heaps of gear, like a lot of gear, and they have for a long time to get to that point. But it's not a secret.
Yeah.
Like, I have no problem. If they want to take that risk and they want to have that as their lifestyle, because that's their decision, go for it. I mean, it's another conversation with bodybuilding about, they all die young and shit like that. That's fine. But if you're competing in a natural federation like ICN, which is stands for I Compete Natural, it's a federation in Australia who I competed under, a natural bodybuilding federation.
Then it's against the rules.
It's against the fucking rules. And I know for a fact, because I know their trainers, and they told me in confidence, but that not naming any names, people at the top level at ICN, the people that win, like the Australian Championship and the International Championship, they're on fucking gear.
Yeah.
They're, if you compete in ICN and you're taking gear,
you suck.
You should compete in a federation that doesn't test and it's open. And the fact that you're not is because you probably can't win that because you're shit. Yeah. Like, it's it's ridiculous.
I'm kind of similar. Like, I don't know if I completely take the same stance, but I definitely am aware of the same thought process that if it's a organization that it's not against the rules, then I guess I kind of agree that, any elite sport or any elite anything all comes at a cost, right? Whether that cost is your body or your love life or, going out partying or, having friends or whatever it is, it all comes at a cost, right? And so part of me is like, well, if people are willing to pay that price, if people are willing to do that to their body to reach whatever level they want to reach, then I'm kind of okay with it. It's not just, you don't have to be taking PEDs to be harming your body. If you go find an elite level retired ballerina who did ballet for her entire life and look at her feet and her hips, and like, it's terrible for the body, right?
Yeah. Or look at the boxing champions like Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, right. Like,
a lot of damage.
So it's not like drugs are the only way you can harm your body to reach an elite level in a sport. So I agree, but I don't know if I agree enough to officially say, like, I don't have a problem with it. Look, I don't know. Like, if it was an organization where the rules clearly, let's say the rules in whatever thing said, you
like
can take
IBJJF.
No. So the other way. If the organization said you can take whatever, opposed, then like professional bodybuilding, right? I don't know if they officially say that, but it's so clear, right?
They're not testing.
But if it's something where it's just kind of like ADCC, where they kind of just plead ignorance, if you will, like, I don't know if I go as far to say, like, oh, it should be allowed.
Yeah.
Like, if someone said to me, okay, IBJJF don't allow you to take drugs, so therefore if you take it, you're cheating, you shouldn't take it, right? Because it's in the rules. But if the question is, do you think that you should just clearly be allowed to take it and then it's up to the individual to take those risks? I don't know. I don't know if I like that because it's, you know,
you force people to do it.
You're then, you're forcing people to take what is a substance with quite severe long-term side effects just to be on the level.
Yeah, exactly. It's huge risk. And what about those people out there that if steroids weren't a question, like if they were not on the table at all, like say there was a very, like IBJJF, for example, let's just use that organization as an example. Say if IBJJF, as they do now, have a very strict no drug policy, you know, they implement USADA testing at Worlds. Take that organization, for example. If you wanted to be a world champion black belt, but you were predisposed to a heart condition, you could, and if IBJJF all of a sudden said, yep, steroids are allowed, you would never, ever be able to compete at the top level. Like there's just no question.
Yeah.
Unless you're absurdly better than everyone. But
yeah, I get that. Like, I mean, it's different, right? Because we're talking about a foreign substance and whether you can take that.
Yeah, we're talking about drugs. We're talking about legal drugs.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm also, how do I want to phrase this? You know, there's plenty of sports where the question of whether you can do it or not is instantly answered with your genetics, right? I mean, I guess this is different because we're talking about whether your genetics allow you to take a foreign substance. So it is different. But I did just want to make the point, like, let's say, for example, people who don't know me in person, I'm like 6'4", right? Which is, you know, 194 centimeters tall. If I wanted to become a professional horse jockey, it's just instantly a no. Yeah. Like it's just a no.
Yeah,
like
I'm just
too big. So like already my genetics, I know this is different because we're talking about whether your genetics allow you to take a foreign substance, but you know, I also get what you're saying, right? It's like, you know,
you're taken out of the question, right? When you otherwise would have been in the conversation.
Opposed to just saying, Adam, you're too tall to be a gymnast or you're too tall to be a jockey, right? It's just not possible for you, right? Opposed to, oh man, it's not because of your genetics, you can't take this foreign substance. And because you can't take this foreign substance,
you can no longer compete
you'll never reach a high level in this sport.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of sucks, right? I mean, so I guess,
but it's also forcing the hand because there's a lot of one thing that we've spoken about so many times on this podcast is the fact that unless you started jiu-jitsu really young, your odds of becoming a world champion black belt is super slim because the current world champion is like 20, 21, you know, because of the explosion of the sport. What you're doing is forcing those young men, young women into taking performance-enhancing drugs.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Oh, man, like it's ridiculous. Like you've probably heard of Ziz. Have you heard of Ziz?
Never heard of it.
So for those...
Sounds like a chewing gum.
Yeah, you haven't heard of David Goggins, so I doubt
Is Ziz a person?
Ziz was a person.
I thought it was like a...
No, Ziz was Aziz. His name's Aziz. Well, it was Aziz. For those that don't know, in the fitness industry, he was a cult sensation. He was one of the first people to make, like, in the aesthetic movement, right? So he was one of the first guys that, you know, really came out and, you know, popularized. You would have seen photos without realizing who it is. His name's Aziz.
He's an Australian dude.
Yeah, he's Australian, young dude. He died at like 21.
Russian-born Australian.
Yeah, Russian-born Australian guy. Died at the age of 21 because he was predisposed to a heart condition and he was taking a lot of steroids, including trenbolone. And he didn't look overly big. He looked diced, but he wasn't huge. He didn't look like
I'm looking at him now. He doesn't look like Phil Heath or anything, but definitely
super shredded, super diced, very like good muscle genetics, not good heart genetics though. And he died at 21. So
it's crazy.
Arguably he was using a lot of party drugs as well, but regardless, like he was abusing some pretty heavy steroids at a crazy level. If you force the hand in jiu-jitsu,
imagine that.
Yeah, exactly.
Super young people having to take it.
And they have a lot of pressure, particularly if they're in a world-renowned team, they're at the top of their game, and maybe they're close, but they need to be matched on the same level of people that are taking it.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about that until now, this conversation about,
the influence on young people.
Yeah, you know, and it wouldn't just be jiu-jitsu. Like imagine gymnastics, particularly female gymnastics, where they retire far younger than male gymnasts because of the way their female bodies develop opposed to male bodies develop.
Yeah.
Female gymnasts, like professional gymnasts, the majority of them retire like before they go off to college.
Yeah.
They retire like in their early 20s, most of them, right? So yeah, imagine then if it was okay, green lighted to take
or as encouraged
PEDs as a gymnast, you'd have, female gymnasts like jiu-jitsu are training from when they're, it's more well known than jiu-jitsu as a sport. So,
train at a very young age.
Yeah, Olympic gymnasts have been training since they were like 4, right? So imagine having like preteen gymnasts taking whatever drugs. Like it's even PEDs aside, it's known that it's just very dangerous and not healthy to take whatever foreign substances for developing brains and bodies, right? Unless it's done in a medical way. Obviously, some things are taken because a body or a brain or whatever might have something wrong with it, in terms of not healthy. So, of course, I'm not saying it's not like no one young takes drugs. Yeah, but it's difference between medicine and PEDs.
We're talking about PEDs
right?
here, yeah.
Yeah, so I hadn't really thought about that because it is true. The current best guys in the world, the guys who are knocking over the old lions and becoming the new lions, in their early 20s. So if drugs were given the green light, I think that instantly makes me say like, no, you should. Well, it does. Like, it instantly makes me think it shouldn't be legal at all. And even things like ADCC should make it completely illegal. Right? Maybe if we're talking a sport where you peak in your 40s, okay, maybe, I don't know, it's a different conversation. But a sport where you're not peaking, but you can be the dude to beat the current world champion as a early 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And it was given the green light to take drugs. Of course you'd take them.
Yeah. And
like,
I mean,
why
if you're listening, right, and you maybe as a devil's advocate, maybe you have the opinion like, yeah, but it's a choice. At the end of the day, it's their choice. And if they want to do it, but you got to realize that is a bullshit argument, because you're talking about someone that has the potential or is like very close to being the best in the world at a sport, like it's their dream, right? And if you're telling that individual, that 20-year-old, that what's standing in between you and the best guy is the fact that he takes drugs and you don't, what the fuck do you think they're going to do?
Yeah. And these
just give up on my dream because I want to, I'm thinking about the long term. Dude,
these are also
20.
Yeah, you're also talking about it at an age where, okay, we're definitely don't want to be going into politics or whatever, but we're talking about an age that more or less internationally, 18 years old or 21 years old across the world is an age where society is more or less deemed that these people aren't yet intellectually developed enough to make smart decisions, hence why they're not allowed to vote yet, hence why they're not allowed to drink alcohol yet, hence why they're not allowed to buy cigarettes yet, right? Like most countries around the world, 18 or 21 is the age where you're allowed to drink. You're legally an adult and allowed to, and you can legally be charged for a crime as an adult or whatever. Like, that's why a 17-year-old who commits a crime is treated differently to an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, right? So, if you had that argument of, it's their choice, it's like, but it's people who aren't old enough to make smart choices
and
yet.
Even if they are 18, right? Like your brain doesn't finish developing and you cannot fully assess risk until you're over the age of 25. Some even say 26. So you're putting a decision in the hands of someone that may not have the best influences around them in terms of like their long-term longevity, like their health.
Yeah.
They like, if say for example, I'm not going to name names, but if you're on a top team and you have your star athlete that is, fucking just super close to being the world's best, but they need to take PEDs to get there, most would influence them to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's in the interest of the gym and the interest of that individual.
And if it wasn't breaking any rules, like,
why the fuck not? You'd be like, dude, come on. Like we've got a doctor behind it, rah, rah, rah. And I'm not saying that all PEDs are going to fucking kill you and you're going to drop dead. And I'm not saying, like, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's had a very long life and he did take a decent amount of exogenous testosterone and he's open about that now. So shock horror for those that didn't know. He came out and admitted that he took roids when he was competing. And There's a big difference, but genetics, a million different
Yeah,
things.
he also took it at a time when
he took very low dose as
but
well.
also he took it at a time where, well, just the fact that it was however many years ago, we didn't know as much then as we do now.
Yeah, exactly.
So whatever long-term consequences we know today, well, they didn't know as much back then, right?
And so if you want to look at all the deaths associated with PED use, you can only just Google bodybuilder deaths like Rich Piana and all sorts of people.
What's the name of that dude who, is it Ronnie Coleman, who now is essentially like a cripple, right?
Yeah.
Because of...
Yeah,
is that a different...
He lifted very heavyweight as well. Like he was... At the time, Ronnie, like he's famous for like lightweight, baby, ain't nothing but a peanut, like all those sayings. If you're like, what the fuck you say? Yeah, Ronnie Coleman's like lightweight, baby, and he basically
he's got a very distinct voice.
Oh yeah, he's a legend. But like during his heyday, he lifted heavy fucking weight, like weight that a human being shouldn't be lifting that regularly. Like I'm talking powerlifting.
But he wasn't like a strong man, was he?
Well, he was an incredibly strong man. But no, he didn't compete at strongman. But he would lift like power lifter heavy weights, right? He insane weights. You just have to Google Ronnie Coleman,
and his back's like destroyed now.
Oh,
right?
yeah, because of his squatting, his
deadlifting,
deadlifting, his discs are fused. Like he's completely fucked. Okay,
so it's not. I mean, he probably took juice as well, right?
Oh, fucking heaps.
But it wasn't like he's crippled because of that.
It was more his training modalities rather than...
I take it back,
PED.
Ronnie. So,
yeah.
Well, you couldn't bash me anyway, bro. So
yeah, probably not. But yeah, I mean, just to come full circle on the whole, like roids in jiu-jitsu or like performance enhancing drugs in jiu-jitsu, it's very obvious.
It frustrates me as well when it's so obvious.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it frustrates me, anyone who's taking it, because like we both agreed, the fact that it is in, for example, IBJJF, it is just clearly against the rules. It's so like, and yeah, it's black and white. It's against the rules. And yet people are so obviously taking it, and dudes just muscles exploding out of their face. Like, you said at the start that traps is a telltale sign, and I didn't know that. Makes that classic photo of Galvao even more obvious. I mean, I know you
do have to look at their before. Like, you have to look at the genetics before. Like, I did touch on it, but I didn't finish the statement. With Tom Hardy, he had very good traps before he started taking gear, or speculative that he took gear, which he probably did. So, he's like, oh yeah, he has big traps, doesn't necessarily mean it. But in most cases, big traps, big delts, point to gear.
But, it's frustrating when people are just, it's like so in your face. And then the fact that we touched on how detrimental that can be to influencing younger people and forcing their hand to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's actually even more shameful now to be taking it in the sport of jiu-jitsu, like.
But I mean, if you just want to take it because you just want to look good, I think that, your priorities may be a little bit out of line, or maybe you don't fully understand what you're doing or taking, which is, it's very complex. It's an incredibly in-depth, people have full degrees on this topic, it gets pretty, the well runs deep. So all I say for those people out there that maybe want or thinking about taking something, just do your research, do your due diligence, and don't just read on forums. Like, seriously delve into it, fully understand the repercussions, the long-term side effects, and then fully understand what you should be taking at what doses. Start very low dose to begin with, and if you're competing in a sport like jiu-jitsu and you're taking it to compete in jiu-jitsu, I would really question your morals.
I think a nice way to, a nice phrase to finish it would be, in the words of every single jiu-jitsu fighter who is clearly on juice but never been caught taking it, it's all just Açai and Jesus, baby.
Exactly.
Just take plenty of Açai and Jesus and you'll look like Galvao, you'll look like Gordon Ryan, and you'll fight as well as they do.
I want to get more Açai.
Açai and Jesus. That's all you need.
Do you want to get some Açai after this?
Let's go. Don't even worry about the outro, bro. You bring the Açai, I'll bring the Jesus.
Oh, schnitzel.
We just start having to get a wider lens.
Yeah.
Every episode that we like record the video of, you and I just get more and more jacked.
Oh, right.
Fat.
I was going a different way to you. I've seen your acai bowls, man.
Yeah. We went for acai a while ago, and Kieren got this tiny little acai bowl, and I was like, I don't know, I got the biggest one they got, and you were loaded. Like, holy fuck. I was still sad when it ended. They're my acai and ice cream are my two things that, like, no matter how big of a serving, when it's gone, I'm like, oh, wish I had more. Yeah. No matter how big. Like, it's not one of those ones where I'm like, oh, I can't finish it. I'll just eat it and eat it and eat it. Then I'm still sad when it's gone. I used to in Brazil buy, me and the guy I was living with, who is a literal piece of shit, that dude I lived with. It's a whole nother thing. But we would go halves in buying, like, oh man, how big was the tub? I don't know. Would have been like a 10 kilo tub or something of acai, like a massive. It's
22.5 pounds for those that are the American people.
For the, what is it? For people who still use the imperial system. Idiots. Right?
Like most of our listeners. We're sorry.
Get with the system, bro. It's metric. Even NASA uses it. Come on.
Oh, shit.
There's been huge deaths over imperial and metric system. There's like been commercial flights where they've incorrectly loaded the amount of fuel into the plane because of converting between pounds and kilograms incorrectly, and planes have run out of fuel. I don't know if plural might be wrong. It's happened at least once. I know that for a fact. Anyway, we would buy these massive tubs of acai and then would go home and would get it out and have to cut it because it's not like we had a commercial freezer. So then we'd have to divvy it up into smaller like ice cream containers or whatever so it would fit in the freezer.
Wow.
I mean, that's when I was at my biggest, bro. I just had so much acai. And I think maybe that's all I'm missing because I'm not religious.
You just need to get the Jesus into your life.
Is the lack of Jesus what's stopping me from looking like Galvan?
It is. It is, yeah. It's holding back your jiu-jitsu. You need more Jesus.
All right, more Jesus. Okay, next week we'll be talking about Jesus.
All right. Well, that's a good place to wrap it up. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, feel free to follow us on Spotify. We're so close to 100 followers. Help us out.
Yes, please, guys. It's a little goal of ours. I know when I watch quite a lot of YouTube, and I know I'm kind of taking over the outro, they get longer and longer. But until we did this podcast, it's like you hear it on YouTube videos. Go on, guys, please click like, subscribe. It helps a lot. And you're like, shut up, dude. And then now I'm in that position. I'm like, come on, click it. I really want that 100.
Yeah, it really does help the show quite a substantial amount. And if you want to go that one step further and support the show, then you can do so on our Patreon. To get to our Patreon, we have a link to that in our Instagram bio, or you can just search Beyond Jiu-Jitsu Podcast on Patreon and find us that way. But thanks for listening, and until next time, guys.
Until next time.